I'm now recording because you have this lovely habit of saying stuff that of not saying stuff that you think is not very interesting when we're
Okay.
recording, and then you say it off mic and it is really interesting.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Well, yeah, let's leap in. It's all good.
Yeah. We last we spoke on these topics was we kind of left it that you and a friend had thrown all your money in and were going to head out to the to Europe to see Metallica. Kirk had said, look, get yourselves out there.
Right. Yeah, we were so my friend Jumbo and I decided, yeah, sorry.
All right.
So yeah, Jumbo and I had decided, okay, we're gonna do this thing. So we were all in. So I took essentially all my CDs that I had collected over the years and some vinyl, cashed it in order to get a plane ticket over and back, obviously. But so we went out there, just totally eyes wide open, had no idea what to do. We had never been to this country or anything like that. So we, ragtag. This is before cell phones, I believe. So and we were on email, but coordinating with setting up a place to stay and all that. And Kirk had told us, don't worry, when you get over there, just we're staying at this hotel, and that's it. So I mean, we kind of were going on a wing and a prayer. I mean, most of the time it's like Lars would ask, say, don't worry, we'll get you set up. But you're kind of like left hanging, like, oh, we're going to get all the way over there. What happens if the person at the front desk doesn't let you in? Anyway, we wound up.
What happens if their version of setup is not your version of setup?
Exactly. There's a bit of a leap of faith there, but yeah. So anyway, we did. Jumbo had known Kirk a lot longer because he was in Spastic Children with Kirk and things like that. So
right.
there was connection. Anyway, so we went over there, flew over, and sure enough, once we got there, we got to the hotel, and reconnected. Here's laminates, you're taken care of. Here's somebody that actually knows they're from Belgium. It was the guy that was the artist for Halloween. So his name's Frederick. He drove us around. He showed us the city. I mean, it was perfect. So, and first night we got there, Kirk took Jumbo and I and his family out to dinner. And anyway, we had seen them in the States a bunch of times, and not commanding large crowds, but this was the first like European festival that Jumbo and I had ever been to. So we really were excited about, what it was going to be like. And it was, like I said before, I think the festival was with Sonic Youth, Faith No More, Lenny Kravitz, Neil Young with Booker T and the MGs, and all these bands. Not a lot of metal on there, but big rock show. Very eclectic lineups, like Europe was famous for. So anyway, and we were like kids in a candy store. They gave us, full access, open bar backstage with beers that one can only dream of. And then we were spending $20 a piece on in the States. We were anyway. So
wow, yeah, I get it. It is kids in the candy store time, isn't it? Really.
Oh yeah, and we cut loose. So anyway, it was a lot of fun running around backstage.
How long did you do that for?
It was 2 nights. The festivals were 2. It was the very 2 last shows of the Black Album tour. So July 3rd and 4th, 1993. The festivals were back to back. Obviously, we got there a couple days early, and we left it about 2 days after. So we got to, piss around Europe for a little bit. Jumbo was also good friends with Jim Martin from Faith No More, and Jim's kind of a partier, so he was like, "Hey, come on out, when you're done with this metal stuff, we'll go over to Amsterdam and really party." I was like, nah, I'm done after this. But anyway, Jumbo went over and, got too high and wound up not meeting Jim, going into a wax museum, completely freaking out, running across the street and plunking down like $500 on a hotel room that he just slept in, and then got up and ran onto the plane. But,
Wow.
so, but we got there. We had these laminates and pretty much could go anywhere we want.
Yeah.
And I actually sat on the side of the stage for a couple of the acts, and then that was interesting too, is being able to see European audiences who I firmly believe there was like over 120,000 people there at each of these shows. They were all there to see Metallica, but once they saw like Neil Young with Booker T and the MGs and I believe Sonic Youth as well. I mean, people were just going absolutely nuts. I mean, these kids had their jaws dropped. But anyway, so it was European festivals. It was fun as hell. And
That's awesome.
Like I
Man.
said, yeah. I mean,
was that kind of where your after that, was that sort of where your relationship kind of ended with them? Did you? Because I can't remember if you were still working with them around the time.
No, definitely still working with them. Yeah, after actually that, at the end of the shows, I met with Tony Smith, who was their kind of their touring manager, personal manager, going on the road.
Yeah.
And Jason Newstead, and they sat with me in the hotel bar, and they said, look, we put out the feelers for like an official fan club, and they got such a huge response from such little effort to just get the word out, that they knew they were onto something. And Jason and Tony, since I had been doing some crew shirts and they thought it was fun and fan related, that they wanted me to design the shirts for the fan club. So I started, submitting designs, but it was at the end of the Black Album tour that I really, that's where I really was working almost, continuously at that point.
Right.
Both for the fan club, designing, fan club shirts. I did the fan cans. I designed, some advertising, and little stuff here and there, and continually on the other side of it, working, designing crew shirts and stuff like that. And that kind of continued on. It wasn't until probably like 98 that I started kind of tapering off. I mean, there was, and again, I think this is where some of my connection with the band early on was as a fan in small clubs, going to see these shows, and we run into each other at parties. I mean, there was a very tight, connected social circle that we careened on. I was a little bit around the outside when it came to Metallica, because they were kind of, they were these rising stars that are almost essentially passing through the Bay Area, where Exodus, Testament, Death Angel, and these guys, we all hung out and grew up together and stuff like that. But and here was something to me that was very familiar, as far as like these guys were hanging out in my hometown and playing shows and doing things like that, along with all the other bands. Yet there was a dramatic, there was a polar shift. These guys were like a corporation. I mean, it was, and it really, and I kind of watched it evolve into that, where I was being asked to do things directly from the band. And then slowly but surely, it was like the manager would call me, and then the tour manager's assistant would call me, and they, with ideas, or we want to. So the distance between me and the band was really starting to be felt, at least on my part, and the designs became fewer and far between. So,
well,
but I,
let's rewind a bit and poke more into what you were hinting at there, which is the scene that you were very much a part of, which is the the legendary Bay Area scene that people like myself have heard so much about, and it's, you know, it's passed into myth, and myth becomes legend, and etc
yeah,
etc.
and even
It's
hearing that is, you know, it's a little daunting because obviously, I mean, we all grow up in scenes, and we hear about the grass is always greener, and and at the time, as well as I'm sure with your upbringing and your situation with your scenes, you know, you you think you're onto something, but you think, you know, it's like, well, this is happening over here and this is happening over there, and oh
yeah,
wow, New York is blowing up, or the Bay Area is blowing
yeah,
up. So
yeah.
there's this kind of, you know, we self-fulfilling, you know, mythology about, you know, what is going on over there. I used to hear about, you know, what was playing at the you know, the marquee was you know, that was it, you know,
And
Hammersmith Odeon on. Huh?
meanwhile over here, I'm buying bootlegs of Exodus live at Ruthie's Inn, you know,
Exactly.
which is your equivalent to my Duchess of York in Leeds. It's like, you know, it's kind of insane how, I mean, we were sort of behind the curve, and well, never really caught up because, you know, UK thrash never really established itself outside of the UK really. But it's that there are lots of similarities, you know, the tape trading scene, and
Oh
just
yeah.
and hanging out with bands, and there being somebody who is handy at art, you know, like yourself. And
It, yeah. I
you
mean,
know,
those branches of this tree, so to speak, are similar on, you know, and it's, you know, you need to have somebody that has a van, you know, somebody's parent has a van, somebody's parent was going to be, you know, permissive enough to let you practice this god awful music in their basement, or, you know, I mean, and then there's
yeah,
somebody that can draw, there's somebody that like is the virtuoso guitar player,
yeah,
and, you know, so these things happen all over, and in the Bay Area, I think that it is supercharged a little bit because the Bay Area had so much of a history of local music, kind of these, you know, prominent music stars over the years, you know, in the 60s and the 70s. And here it was, we were like, okay, there's another wave. Well, it can't be this music because nobody, you know, there's 10 people at our shows or going to the shows. So, you know, we took it seriously, but we also kind of were like, are we on to something? I don't know, but we enjoy it. So what the hell? We didn't really give,
yeah.
you know, just like anybody in any scene. So
Yeah, I
um
know. I do think, because to me it sounds like that, you know, the Bay Area was going to happen whether Metallica were there or not.
yeah.
Um, but it kind of like, I guess Metallica could have come from anywhere, and all of these bands could have grabbed onto their coattails, because the New York scene, everybody in the scene was clinging onto Metallica's coattails. Or do you think it just brought more attention to bands like Legacy, who became Testament, Exodus, and, you know, Death Angel,
Well,
etc.?
for sure. I mean, Metallica had a huge hand in garnering that attention in the Bay Area. I would say that
Right.
Exodus. I've talked with my friend Andy Anderson about this, and, you know, he even called the other day and he was like, "Are you an Exodus guy or a Metallica guy?" And I go,
Wow.
that right there is the rub. Is like, if you're in, we were Exodus people because Exodus was our. I'll equate them to the Raiders. You know, they could have the ball on, you know, on the 1 yard line and they'd still fumble it up, but they got down to the 1 yard line. These guys were the, you know, the underdogs.
Yeah.
But, you know, Destiny, I don't know. It's like they had all the pieces to the puzzle, and Metallica saw some of that. They saw, I mean, Metallica is I would say like a, you know, conglomeration of Nwabum, new wave of British heavy metal. They even got their start playing cover songs of obscure new wave of British heavy metal. Exodus were writing these songs. Exodus was not following a template per se, where you can see that with Metallica. Metallica was kind of piecing these, the puzzle pieces. And I think when Exodus and Slayer and things like that, those were elements that were, absorbed into the Metallica thing. They perfected it. And nobody can deny that Metallica perfected what was being concocted in these little labs all over at different places. They put the pieces together. So going back to the Exodus or Metallica, if you were in the Bay Area, Exodus was the thing that we knew. Metallica came in, but were so congruent to the scene, both socially as well as musically, that they were absorbed into it. But once you saw Metallica compared to what you saw other bands doing, there was this X factor that, they were doing it to the nines. Everybody knew it. It didn't matter who you were, who your favorite band was. This band was undeniably going somewhere because they had this it factor, this X factor.
Did Kirk joining kind of kick Metallica on? Was Dave kind of visibly holding them back, or
Well, I think it was right place to right time. I think if Dave had managed his demons, there was no stopping that trajectory. I think Dave was a huge part of that band. And I can say that with, when he was asked to leave the band, he came back with such a vengeance. Megadeth. It was like, there are conversations about this too, that Dave was like a man possessed. This was vengeance. And he came back with a vengeance, and it was neck and neck. He was giving them Metallica a run for their money. This was in the Bay Area as well. He had Kerry King playing with him. It was a powerhouse band. And Metallica, kind of took a little bit of a wobble on that one. I think Kirk coming into the band definitely gave legitimacy, I would say, almost. It's hard to tell the reasonings why, but I knew Kirk had seen Metallica and was just like, these guys are on their way. So when he joined it, it definitely kind of wobbled Exodus a little bit. And there was, there's some another point was like the Die by Your Hand. That was brought over to Metallica.
Yeah. Now I've heard about this from, funnily enough, I got a message on Instagram today from Gary Holt. Because we toured together back in the day for on their Fabulous Disaster tour, and I sent him a message a while ago about doing the podcast, and he was like, "Yeah, cool," and then I didn't hear from him, and I just had a message from him to say, "Look, sorry, been quiet, loads going on, but let's catch up in the next couple of weeks." And I remember speaking to him about Die by My Hand, a long time ago.
Again, I what I remember.
Actually, sorry. Sure. Just let me pause you there. For everybody listening who isn't aware what we're talking about, the Die by My Hand riff in Creeping Death, the we all know it, don't we? Clap along. That's an Exodus riff basically. And now Kirk seemed to think that he wrote it, and Gary seems to think that he wrote it. So we're
and there are Exodus fans who heard the song and heard the Metallica.
I remember hearing it on Live at Ruthie's Inn. I remember that. And do you know what the weird thing is? I've just remembered hearing it on that bootleg when you mentioned it, like hearing it in an Exodus song. I was thinking, I've heard that. Oh God, yeah, no, I remember hearing it. Yeah,
there were lots of little sprinkles of, again, this, we're kids and we're like, they're taking away our toys, this kind of this, they're, wait, that was ours, and there's this hometown locals only,
oh yeah,
you
yeah,
kind of keeping your arms around it, but it was nebulous because they had come in and they were friends with everybody. So I mean, we all hung out in socials. So it was kind of like, yeah, you shouldn't have taken that, and there was this back and forth and such like that. I mean, Andy Anderson talks about using the Johnny Got Your Gun, because that was their logo, was the cover of the book from Johnny Got Your Gun, and Metallica eventually did the one video from the movie Johnny Got Your Gun. And there's lots of little things that can't, people buzz about. But anyway, Metallica would definitely had their roots in with the Bay Area, and the Cliff and Kirk thing all equate to that. Those were the natural. If you wanted somebody that understood what their sound was going to be and putting in, it would be somebody from the Bay Area. Just like Slayer, when Jeff Hanneman passed, the obvious choice and pretty much the only choice would be Gary Holt from Exodus. I mean, that's how much the metal community respects and understands the importance of the Bay Area thrash, and what Gary and Kirk, they were at the beginning of it. Tom Hunting too. I mean, oh my God.
Yeah. And when Slayer used to come through to the Bay Area, that must have been fun.
Yeah, at the beginning, I mean, it was they played a couple shows. They played the one show that I saw, they had already been through once. I think the bootleg that you're talking about is when they played at Ruthie's Inn in Exodus, and I think they were playing 2 nights, not at the same venue. But the first night they played, I think it was in San Francisco, and this is what I've been told, was that they showed up, and people had heard what they sounded like because of the tape trading, and obviously there was that. But for some reason, coming from Southern California, they showed up with eye makeup, and Paul Bailoff, who is the singer of Exodus and who is the standard bearer for Bay Area thrash. He was the death to posers. He would the stories. Well, you've all heard the stories. They're legendary about his demand for you walk this metal line. This you shall not be poser, and he was brilliant about it. And that kind of kept everybody to the Bay Area's idea of don't pull that rock star attitude around us, because it doesn't wash. And so anyway, so Slayer had come up, and they were wearing supposedly eye makeup on the first show. And after that, Paul took them aside and said, they'll kill you. And if you go into Ruthie's Inn, I don't care if you sound like the heaviest band in the world, the fans will tear you apart. And that was the first and last time they wore eye makeup, supposedly, from that point forward.
Nice.
And I had saw them. They had this Wes Robinson, who, as you talked about, Ruthie's Inn was this small little Bay Area local club.
Yeah.
And Wes Robinson was the owner and ran it. And there are legendary stories about Wes, somehow not coming up with whatever money that you owed, you were owed for playing that night.
Right.
And all these other things. He was a wonderful guy, and he really gave the opportunity to a lot of it. This was the only place that was, you could go as an underage kid to go see a band during the week.
Yeah.
And sure, you had Slayer, Exodus, and those guys were commanding the Friday, Saturday slots for the big $8 ticket,
Yeah.
But for the rest of the week, you had bands like Pillage Sunday, Sacrilege BC, and these smaller bands that were kind of coming up. And same with like Legacy, which became Testament, Death Angel, and Attitude Adjustment. You could see a show almost every day of the week for like a couple bucks, and that's where a lot of these other bands were kind of coming up.
Wow.
But the Slayer gig, and so Wes put on this one big couple festivals in this park called Aquatic Park, and he called them Day on the Dirt, which was kind of a nod to the Day on the Greens, which were the big Bill Graham flashy, big rock show. But it was Slayer, Exodus, Suicidal Tendencies.
Would this have been one of those shows that took place on the back of a truck?
It actually, they had, I think there was at one point there was a flatbed truck that they would pull up.
Yeah. I'm sure
I remember it as kind of like a really ragtag, like maybe, strapped together pallets.
Well, I've definitely seen pictures of Slayer playing on a flatbed truck when they're very young.
Oh yeah, and kids that I grew up with, literally, Andy Anderson and Toby Rage were these guys that would stage dive. They were legendary. I mean, there are photos in that Murder in the Front Row, as we talked about that book.
That's the photos I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah, the two guys you'll see most, and they used to call him Andy Airborne Anderson.
Yes,
because he was literally leaping across, flying over. Toby would always go for, I go for height. I don't know. There are things that don't seem humanly possible, but he would stage dive. He would leap off of the Marshall stacks into the crowd. It was amazing. But those shots of us all in that little park, and there was, maybe 150, 200 people there tops to see, Exodus, Slayer, and Suicidal Tendencies. And it was amazing. It was just amazing. $5. There were people who even thought that $5 was too much, and they tried to, float across this estuary that was in between the freeway and the park to save $5. The only thing is that estuary was so polluted with sewage that, they would essentially. I used to joke that the first pit was started at that Day on the Dirt because there were several people that had fallen into the estuary, and the smell of sewage kept everybody in a circle around them. They just didn't want to be around. So, but
I mean, it's when you hear stories like this, it's kind of like, there's always something relatable, like cobbling shows together in a field and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, it's what every scene does. Did you so you started out on the tale of the legacy backdrop, and presumably did you become sort of backdrop man from that point on, or was it literally anything you can lay your hands on, like, if somebody wanted something painted on, then you do it, be a backdrop, a drum kit, a jacket, whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I would always hesitate to say that I was the guy that did this. And
right, okay, you were one of those people.
Well, I was one of those people, but yeah, I mean, the other thing too, this is prior to the internet. So, I mean, everything was word of mouth. Yeah. And, kids that I went to high school with and junior high were literally like Alexis, this friend of ours, Alexis Olson, he was managing Legacy at the time. So he'd invite me over to his mom's house, and on her kitchen table, we draw out these, satanic, blood spurting corpses for these flyers, and his mom would be cooking, looking over and, wincing at us. And this was our, we're plotting world domination. Leave us alone. You know,
Yeah.
we're you know, no, more blood, more blood. And anyway, we'd be drawing these things. And, you know, he would tell, you know, somebody else, oh, we had Mark do that flyer, or Lizzie did this comic book for Exodus. And so there were several people, but I mean, again, it was, you know, it was, oh, this guy knows how to play guitar. Oh, this guy knows how to draw, or
Well,
this guy will
that's
paint
a
something
scene.
for $20. Yeah,
That's a scene,
it's a scene.
essentially, what you're describing, isn't it? It's like, you know, people know people. You all kind of just like share contacts, and you know,
Yeah,
there's none of, oh, that's our guy, he does that for us, find your own. It's like everybody just uses everybody's stuff, you know. And yeah,
absolutely. And I got to be known actually more for drawing logos on the backs of people's like army jackets or something. And that's how I met Exodus, is because people would see, you know, these like Led Zeppelins or Motorheads that I drew. And
yeah,
actually that was one of the first things I did. I did a jacket for Rick Hunolt for Exodus, because he saw me hanging out in the park across the street from my school. And I had my jacket on, and it became like a little calling card. So every once in a while, and that's how I met, you know, Exodus. And I wound up painting a jacket for Zetro, you know, a Motorhead thing.
now that's interesting. That's reminded me of a conversation we had off mic, I think, about and I can't remember how you ended up there, but you said you were in the UK and you found loads of bootleg Exodus stuff, and you were like,
Oh
and
yeah,
like you rang Rick, and he was like, yeah, buy it all, buy it all.
yeah. That was the thing. Piccadilly Circus. You know, you'd walking around, and you know, this was in 1986. I went over there, and you know, the album, the Bonded by Blood, had been out for almost a year at that point. And yeah, there was like back patches, coffee mugs, hats, patches, stickers. And he's like, get it all. Yeah, I called him up and I was like, wow, you guys got merch over here? And he's all, no, I don't. No, we don't. Get it. Bring it over. So he wanted me to buy a bunch of it and bring it. And I was like, I can't afford it, all this stuff. So anyway,
That is the
fun.
typical reaction of somebody at that age, at that stage in the business, where you, like, you know, you're flattered that someone's bootlegging you. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you know, it's not until months and years later that you become bitter about it. But
yeah, I mean, I've always tried to stay away. I've been bootlegged before by my, you know, for some of the Metallica stuff, and I laugh at it because number one, you know, that's done and done, but it's almost gives you legitimacy. It's like, hey, I'm good enough to be bootlegged. I feel good about myself, you know.
Absolutely.
At least it's the first, and then
imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, and if somebody is literally imitating what you're doing, then you're doing something right.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I think, and that's funny because that does segue into the idea of we had an idea of how big things were going at that point, but it was even the bands were starting to go, what? You got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
And I think we talked a little bit about Alex Skolnick as a friend of mine that I went to. I had 1 year of high school with him, and we became friends. And since I was doing flyers for Legacy, you know, we kind of word of mouth, we would hang out and talk. And the first time that Testament went to Europe, I mean, they were just blown away at the response from the fans. I mean, there were huge Testament tattoos going across these, you know, massive fans, and they were, you know, trying to break into their caravan where they were. I guess they have some kind of camper that was their dressing room, and I mean, they absolutely went ape shit for them. So anyway, there was this like, oh my God, you know, and I'm going to be back in time for history class, but right now I'm playing like a festival, 40,000 people who all are chanting Testament songs, you know, when we couldn't fill up Ruthie's Inn with fans. Over here, there's like, they adored them. And it was amazing. It was great.
Yeah, I think
Um,
Europe adopted just about every thrash band before their own countries. You know,
yeah,
it's literally, it was like having such success in Europe made American kind of labels sit up and go, we should really put our bands out over here because they seem to be killing it in Europe. Um,
absolutely.
and yeah, it's kind of weird. One thing that I thought of when you were talking there was, where in your mind does Testament fall in here? Because, you know, Testament, previously Legacy, previously with Zetro, who then goes to Exit. Yeah, they
Yeah,
seem to come along. They seem to be like, you know, almost still referred to today as like, you know, the Metallica of the second wave. It's like the second
yeah,
wave had almost begun. Um, and they seem to be at the forefront of that. And I, you know, I don't know how, kind of, you know, how or why, but they just seem to appear and already have momentum instantly as soon as they appeared. You know, Death Angel seemed to take a back seat, you know, and maybe even Exodus to a certain extent. Testament had a real impact.
yeah. I mean, again, from the perspective from where I sat in the Bay Area, I mean, Legacy were one of those bands, kind of like I was saying before, about being able to go see a show in the middle of the week. You know, most like Alex Skolnick was my age. And at this time, we're talking about, you know, 15, 16 years old, where they're starting to get more and more gigs, but they can't play San Francisco because it's got a bar.
Yeah.
So you can't, I mean, there was a bar at Ruthie's, but, you know, kind of took a blind eye to it. But so, I mean, there was, and that was the thing about Death Angel too. These guys were kids, and that was the word of mouth. You got to hear what these young kids are doing. I mean, it
Yes.
was,
Yeah.
but the only time you can see them is after school, before a soccer practice, you know, at Ruthie's Inn in the middle of the day or whatever
Yeah.
it was,
Yeah.
because so a lot of these guys that we all grew up with in the Bay Area were following on the coattails of what Metallica and Exodus were kind of laying down. And I would say, like, you know, Legacy was just maybe a step behind
Yeah.
Exodus. Exodus had already taken, unfortunately, a 2-year pause with an album that is arguably a seminal Bay Area thrash record for all of thrash metal. I mean, it's
Yeah.
Bonded by Blood. I mean, Andy and I were arguing about this. Kill 'Em All, Bonded by Blood. You know, where do you know? Kill 'Em
Wow.
All came out 2 years before, but Bonded by Blood had been written, sang, and everything else. But at the same time, it was literally just through, you know, fumbling with legalities and stuff like that. So,
Well, it was
so
one of many combat fuck ups, basically.
yeah, and I think that pause also for these other bands that were up and coming or coming through the
They
work,
they filled the gap. They filled
they
the
filled
gap
the
that,
gap.
yeah.
But also, it wasn't until Bonded by Blood was coming out, you know, because it's almost like a cue.
Yeah.
Metallica came
Yeah.
through and were way ahead. And so, okay, they're in that. So you're not going to have to compete with Metallica for a Friday or Saturday night gig where people are going to be able to see you. Um, uh, Exodus was taking up those weekend slots, and maybe they would open with Legacy or somebody else like that. I
Yeah.
mean, those, and that was almost the lineup. You know, it was
Yeah.
like, I can't move to the next square until this guy moves to this next square. So hurry up and get your record out so I can get to this, you know. And
Yeah.
locally, that was in the mindset, I believe, for most of us. And it then it became, the field was so packed with all these up and comings, you know, these bands that were springboarding on essentially their careers were just launching. So when you talk about like Legacy, when Zetro left Legacy to join Exodus, that took a hobble really to Legacy.
Yeah.
That and again, you know, it's almost like the chess pieces were moving around so quickly that it was like, no, Exodus was just about to, you know, and oh wait, Legacy was just about to, you know,
Well,
it seemed like
I remember at the time, I mean, because it bled over into the press and over here, you know, everybody was aware that that Zet had come in from, and you know, we hadn't heard anything of Testament yet.
yeah,
You know, but we were aware that Zet used to sing in this band that was called Legacy, who were now called Testament, and you know, there's an album coming out, there's an album in the works. So we all heard, you know, Zet as, you know, singer of Exodus and that was that we'd never heard him sing a note prior to that. And it was the unfortunately rather lackluster Pleasures of the Flesh that was his kind of debut, which was particularly underwhelming.
And I mean, I will say that the Legacy demo is got to be hands down one of the best demos going around. I mean, and that
now you see, you're just showing off now, Mark. You're just showing off. You're being the ultimate metal elitist now. Oh, the demo with the old singer.
It's a famous demo. It really is. I snuck it into Tower Records. A friend of mine was working, and Alex said, "Dude, can you get this to play over the speakers in Tower?" And I was like, "I'll ask." And you're not supposed to do that. It's only supposed to be, you know, it's like, you know, you're only supposed to play. But I snuck in there, and my friend put it on the tape deck, and we sat there, and you know, me, Eric Peterson, and Alex were standing in the front waiting to see the manager come running back, because all of a sudden this loud noise comes across the speakers and everybody's looking up. And anyway, that was our little prank. But
I've done that a few times. I worked in record shops, so I've definitely done that. I've done that with my own band. I've done that with Acid Rain. Snuck it on in Virgin Records in the middle of the Saturday afternoon to see what everybody would do, and you just see people flicking through records, and all of a sudden they'd stop and look up.
Yep. It's a great feeling. And then it's like, oh, we got away with that. And then funny enough, like 5 years later, I'm working at Tower Records designing these, you know, the displays, and I'm putting up Death Angel displays, Testament displays,
everyone.
And it's like, yes, screw you. These are our guys, you know, and they make them, but now they're on major labels. So I actually get paid to do this now. So
that is awesome. That's kind of like, you know, full circle and recognition of you know, that the hard work and everything that everybody's put in, because you know, they're whether there was a scene that was internationally recognized there because Metallica came from it, you know, whether that's the case or not, it's the time is the ultimate test, and here we are 30 years later talking about those days.
Exactly.
If not longer ago. And that's, you know, that's the proof in the pudding, that all these bands are still around, and they're all still, well, apart from Slayer, they're all still around, and they're all still putting out new albums. Well, maybe Lars Rocket as well, but
Laz Rocket is another. I mean, Bay Area, Laz Rocket headlined over everybody. They headlined over Metallica when Metallica first came up. Laz Rocket were the and it. I know half those guys, and they're wonderful guys. And rest in peace, Willie Lang and Vic Agnello, the drummer and the bass player, respectively. And talk about a band that springboarded other people to do other things. But they were the go-to metal band.
So would you say that they're the band with the biggest influence on the Bay Area scene that nobody's aware of, as in nobody's aware of the amount of influence that they had on that scene in general? Because let's face it, their career never really happened. It never really took off.
It never really took off. They were
two thrash for metalers and two metal for thrashers.
Yeah, there's that. There's they were the. It's hard to say, and it's incredibly difficult because I really do like these guys personally.
Yeah.
As
Don't
people.
worry, I'm sure they're not going to see this.
Oh no, but no, I'm sure they will because I'm going to tell them about it.
Right. Okay. I love Lazarus, by the way, one of the best bands ever. Just
out there. I think
in case they are watching at any time.
Oh yeah. No, they were a solid band, put on a great show. I mean, this was like almost like homemade pyrotechnics.
Yeah.
Not necessarily feeling entirely safe as a fan going to any of these shows because literally you had a coffee can filled with explosives that the manager would, we'll just put this in there and light it off and hope for the best. Anyway, they were definitely they just had the in with all the clubs too, and they had been essentially the first local band that was let's call it professionally put together and professionally run.
Yeah.
I mean, Exodus was managed by, friends that had some knowledge, but they were learning as we go, just kind of like all of us really were. And Laz Rocket, their manager, he knew a lot of people and he was really smart. And I mean, hands down, an excellent manager. And that's kind of set the bar for these other bands that were local to say, we do need real management if we want to get out of the smaller places. So Laz Rocket had the formula. They had, but
for me, it's
they didn't have the it factor. They didn't have whatever it was that everybody was going for.
Yeah,
you had Y&T who had the sound and the virtuosity, but they were lost somewhere in between metal and rock. And with that being so nebulous at the time, kind of had a later start, had to fall into one category.
It was a big thing because I remember getting Laz Rocket albums and trying, and I remember thinking like just the imagery, the artwork, and everything else was just a little bit too heavy metal, because bearing in mind at this time there's only fucking two genuine genres of heavy metal. There's heavy metal and there's thrash metal. Whether or not you call hair metal a genuine established genre, then maybe it is. But the only reason it's even established as a genre is because of thrash, and it became thrash versus glam, if you like. And so, like you said, it plays into it being very nebulous at the time, which is just something as simple as the way they were representing themselves through their imagery it was a little bit old metal, and thrash was this new thing. Thrash is where this where you dress down to be in a band, and Laz Rocket didn't seem to like have the sound of a thrash band, but they clearly weren't. And no matter how much I tried, it's like it's just too Dio, it's just too Sabbath, it's just too it's too old. It felt, do you know what I mean? It just felt like, and it felt like they were really trying to be a thrash band, but it just lacked authenticity, or not so much authenticity. Not so much. That's a bit unfair, to be honest, because they were a good band, as you've already said. I mean, I saw them in Leeds on the huge fest we did over there, and they were great. But clearly, what they were doing, just like I said, I think it just fell between two stools. It didn't work for thrashers, It didn't work for metalers. It was, too thrash for metalers and too metal for thrashers, and I just think they were really unlucky.
Yeah, I think that, as well as I think that they had a concept and an idea of what they wanted to do, but it was mostly presentation and the substance of the songs. wasn't to that level where it
Yeah.
was so unique that it would set them, you are squarely in this log. It was just, you're the headliner, and we're going to try to come up.
Yeah, the sum did not equal the constituent parts.
Exactly. All good people, all talented, just the sum of the parts just didn't quite add up, yet they were headlining over everybody. So I mean, that wasn't, so
it's but again, every band, when you were talking about them and saying like, but they had the management, but every scene also has that band. Every scene has that band that is just a little bit ahead of everybody else, and just a little bit smarter, a little bit older, and a little bit smarter, and all. And that band rarely is the most successful in the scene. It has its day in the sun, and that's and the day in the sun is when you've got all of these young bands just behind you who are all keen and got momentum and are desperate, and eventually they just stampede over the band that was once top of the pile.
And to their credit, I think they kind of opened a little bit of the doors, so to speak. Maybe not for beneficial reasons to the crowd, but more of like, it just so happened that you could have a band that sounds like they do headlining on a weekend at some of these venues. So it was giving more, like, we could sell the tickets. They could sell the tickets. Whether they could sell the tickets because they had Metallica opening or Exodus or something like that, that I'm sure that helped.
But what that does as well is that introduces those support bands to the promoter of that venue, and he sees they go down very well, and then all of a sudden, Lars Ulrich opened the door. What a Freudian slip, right? But Lars Rocket, for fuck's sake, Lars Rocket opened the door to playing those clubs on a Saturday, and then Lars Rocket were opening the door for the support bands to come back and maybe headline there on a Saturday, and all of a sudden you got the makings of a scene.
Exactly. And then, like we were talking about, like Murder in the Front Row is kind of like this, it's like the yearbook, and
definitely seems like that.
Yeah, for us it was like a yearbook. I mean, we were flipping through and there's pictures of us all hanging out, or I mean, it was a bunch of goofy kids all hanging out in the same place where lightning struck and things took off. And this is something I've talked to Brian Liu and Harold about briefly, but there seems to, if you read that book, you would never know that you might not know that the Lars Rocket was even there at the time.
Yes. Yeah.
And
you felt that was a bit of a glaring omission, but by the same token, I can also see, it is the story of thrash, and I'm afraid they ain't a thrash band, so they don't get in the story. You've got to kind of decide what that.
True.
Do you know what I mean? I can see where you're coming from as somebody who's there at the time, and it feels like that there should be a mention, but as somebody who wasn't there at the time and looking at it as a documentation of the era of thrash metal, it doesn't suffer from the omission of Lars Rocket, that's for sure.
Right, and this is probably the reason why I'm not asked to do many podcasts, is because I believe that if you're going to tell the story, tell warts and all. And like we were just talking about, there is an element of Lars Rocket that was important to that scene.
I get that, but I also think it's by the accident of their age and who they were. So you see, if you document Lars Rocket, then surely you've then got to document the band that they first supported at those venues, so they could get it, and it then becomes a never-ending story.
This is true.
As opposed to if you go, well, we're going to capture thrash metal. Are you thrash metal? No, you're not in. Are you thrash metal? No, you're not in. And that's it's an unfortunate consequence. But I think you're right to bring it up, because that's why you're here, dude. That's why you're here. It's you've got the insider knowledge. You were there, And so I'm now going to argue against myself and say, yes, you were totally right. And it's a glaring omission.
Thus concludes our podcast.
And they should be in there. You're right. You're right. But you know what? That does bring it all round to a lovely conclusion. Don't go anywhere because I want to have a quick chat with you anyway. But for now, Mark, a big thank you from me, and also a big thank you from everybody listening and watching, because that's been a fascinating journey into one of into thrash metal's Jerusalem.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to yet again bend your ear for some period of time.
No worries, man. No worries. If it is Jerusalem, then that does not make you Jesus, but it does make you an apostle, I think. So,
one that gets knocked off early on, I assume.
Yeah. Well, let's hope not. Let's stop recording because I'm talking absolute crap. Thank you very much.
Thank you.